Hey, Steve Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. Lots to touch on this week. We got an update from the Bank of Canada. I'm going to walk you through some of those comments, as well as an update on what's happening in the Canadian housing market, the regional differences that are playing out that I think are important to articulate. And then, of course, the staggering announcement from the BC government, which these housing supply changes are going to drastically reshape the entire lower mainland of BC. So I'm going to walk you through those updates and exactly what I think it means and how it could impact you moving forward. So stick around for that. But I think we have to start open with some comments this week from the Bank of Canada's Deputy Governor, Carolyn Rogers. She was here in Vancouver at a business conference, and she made some interesting comments, and I want to clip to those right here.
We have even lower interest rates, and so we had a real run-up in house prices, on average 50% across Canada. Now, we've had a big increase in interest rates since then, so you would have anticipated maybe erasing all of that gain, but we haven't. And I think our view on that is what we have is a structural supply problem. So we can move interest rates around; it will have some effect, but really what we need to address is the supply problem. So again, going all the way back to the dynamics here in this market. We've taken a number of policy actions over the years to affect demand for housing, and we still have a housing affordability issue. So, we are really glad to see the degree of attention this is getting from all levels of government, and we need some coordination on that. We need some action. I think if we can address the supply issue, that's our best route to housing affordability.
So, I'm not sure if she had like a slip up, but she talks about pandemic pricing across the country going up 50%, and she's surprised that we haven't wiped out those pandemic gains given where interest rates have moved to. And I just want to calculate that and put that into some context for people. Again, assuming this wasn't a slip up, I think it was. If you were to reduce if you have a 50% lift in house prices across this country, you would need a 33% decline to remove those gains. Now, 33% decline is basically right on par with what the U.S. experienced in 2008 and 2009. So what you're telling me is she was expecting some sort of large housing crash and crisis, or that she was expecting or maybe hoping for. I don't know, but it seems like, and again, people say, well, 33% correction, that would come with a lot of ramification. Again, I'm not just saying like you get a 33% correction in Surrey or, Brampton, Ontario, or, some far-flung suburb in Ontario. We're talking like a 50% retracement across Canada, a 33% retracement across Canada would have second-order impacts, massive job losses, layoffs, I would argue some financial institutions coming into disarray, etc. So kind of some perplexing comments, but again, I think it does sort of bring us to the next point, which is, again, there are regional differences in housing. Now, can we see these 33% corrections in some of these markets? Yes, I think we're in some of these markets, we're actually getting closer to that number. I mean, I would certainly point you to a chart here that RBC put out this week, which really shows the regional differences across the country right now, just showing the change in inventory, right? And of course, the more inventory you have on market, the more downwards pressure puts on pricing. So, Toronto leading the country by seeing a 50% change in inventory. You contrast that with Calgary, which is down 17%, or Vancouver that's up 12%, and it kind of gives you some context to see that this housing correction is so far largely concentrated in the GTA and pockets of Greater Vancouver, and particularly in the Fraser Valley. So again, kind of watching that moving forward, but Bank of Canada governor again saying, well, we've got this housing supply issue, and that's why our interest rates really haven't fully filtered through. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think that interest rates really haven't, push through into the we haven't gotten through the whole refinance cycle, right? 50% by the end of this year, 50% of Canadians will have not seen a mortgage payment increase. So we haven't really felt the full impacts of this interest rate cycle. It's still coming through. So I would kind of caution her on, just focusing on the supply side. Now, on the supply side, we've seen all levels of government over the last 4 to 6 months fighting over who should do what, whose responsibility is. Let's all get in a room. We're going to give you, this housing accelerator fund, but you got to build the housing. But, how are we going to pay for the infrastructure? And so there's all this argument that is going on around the housing file. And so the BC government is taking it kind of into their own hands. And again, whether you like the guy or dislike the guy, we'll give David Eby credit. He's been on the show a couple times. He has gone out, and it takes balls. This guy is just ramming through pretty much whatever he wants to do. And he is drastically changing the housing landscape in this province. And again, right or wrong, you can like the policy, you can dislike the policy, but I've never seen a politician just say, I don't really care, I'm just going to do whatever I want, and just ram this through. And so these are drastic changes that I personally think are needed. And so what he's announced this week is basically what, for example, Pierre Poilievre in his platform, his conservative platform has been pushing for, which is high density around transit. High density around, for example, SkyTrain stations. So the BC government has announced some large changes around the housing front. So the new legislation is going to mandate high density zoning around SkyTrain. So if you're within 200 meters of a SkyTrain station, you're going to have to build a minimum of 20 stories. You're going to have to rezone the land around the SkyTrain station, 200 meters, minimum 20 stories. If you're within between 200 to 400 meters from that radius, minimum of 12 stories. And if you're within 400 to 800 meters, you're going to be minimum of 8 stories. Okay, so this is drastic. Basically what they're doing is they're taking zoning away from the municipalities and saying, you guys keep doing this sort of spot rezoning where it's like, every developer has to kind of apply to the city. They have to go to all these public hearings. They have to hear all these sort of announcements. They debate, they deliberate, and each project will get different levels of density based on the negotiations that sort of take place. And this obviously, of course, slows down the development process because they can add a couple of years to a project just by going through this whole rezoning process. So the BC government is saying, no, you are going to be mandated. Every municipality in BC with a population greater than 5,000 people is going to have to approve this density. And it's not just around SkyTrain stations, it's also around bus exchanges. And so bus exchanges, there's going to be slightly lower density around these bus exchanges, but nonetheless, it's still excessive. And so what it's going to do is there's going to a couple things that I think are going to play out here. Now, when you do this mass rezoning, don't forget that 2 weeks ago, the BC government said single-family zoning is basically extinct in all of BC now. So they also introduced this multiplex bill a couple weeks ago. So they're saying if you have a single-family house in BC, you can tear it down and build a new single-family house, but you can't restrict and outlaw them from building duplex, triplex, fourplex, sixplex, depending on the lot size. So all this, they're basically doing this mass upzoning all at once. Instead of this sort of periodic spot rezoning, they've taken away basically the zoning that normally is municipalities to decide. And so there's obviously some controversy around it. There's going to be a lot of people that are pissed off. But at the end of the day, it's if you want to ramp through housing supply, you need to basically take the politics out of it. So you need to take the municipal politicians out of it, and you need to basically force through this mass density. And so that's what's happening. So again, now if you're near a SkyTrain station, you're going to get a land lift. Your values have gone up almost overnight automatically once this legislation passes. Now, This is also going to impact your property taxes. So let's just say you have a single family house near a SkyTrain station. You're now allowed to do 20 stories. Your property taxes are based on highest and best use. So if the highest and best use is not a single family house, but it's 20 stories, your property taxes are going to go through the roof. And so there's a small little asterisk in this. If you've owned and lived in your house and it's your primary residence and you've been there for more than 10 years, you are not taxed at highest and best use. Basically, I think what they've tried to do through this is they're obviously trying to be not kick out seniors out of their house. Hey, I've been here for 30 years and I can't afford, this massive tax bill increase. So they've eliminated that. But if you just moved or you've been there for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, you're now going to be taxed on highest and best use. So what's that going to do is it's going to force a lot of these people out. It's going to force land assemblies to happen and then that density to come up. And again, I still think that we're fighting this economic gravity, which is like higher interest rates, expensive construction costs, faltering resale market that is not going to spur immediate mass development. But I think it is laying the groundwork, again, for the next real estate cycle. I think you are laying the groundwork for a lot more density to come. So it's interesting to see these nuances as well. One of the ones that comes to my mind is I grew up in Steeston Village, for example. Funny enough is there's actually a bus exchange in Steeston Village. Now, if you've never been to Steeston Village, it's kind of this like historic little town. There's lots of movies filmed there. It's a fisherman's village. That's what it is. It's a fisherman's village, and they've always capped density at like 2 to 3 to like upwards of like 4-story condos because they've tried to respect sort of the character and the heritage of the area. But there's literally a bus exchange like a block out from the village. And so under this new proposal, you could hypothetically get like 8 to 12-story towers in Steeston Village, which would be unprecedented and in my honest opinion would kind of ruin the glitz and the glamour of the village. So I don't see that going over very well. But this is, again, coming into the politics. I don't think you can please everybody. On a whole, I do like the policy changes. They are needed. They remove the politics. I think we are structurally underbuilding housing in this country. Yes, the resale market is artificially inflated vis-a-vis a decade plus of low interest rates, speculation, foreign capital, etc. But the rental market, I think, shows you all you need to know is the fact that rents has still been growing double digits. Suggests to me again that there's a structural shortage, which should not be surprising when you import 1 million people a year into this country. It's just hard to build to keep up with that capacity. So that's what's happening on the BC government side. Now, again, you're doing this mass rezoning. The legislation still has to pass. I don't see why it's not. I think it's basically a done deal. They might make some tweaks around the fringes to address some of these issues that we've kind of discussed in this video. But as a whole, again, single family house zoning basically gone overnight. And now you've got high density up to 800 meters from a SkyTrain station. And now keep in mind, the cities still have the authority and the ability to increase the density. So the BC government's just saying, hey, minimum, within 200 meters, minimum 20 stories, right? It's nothing from stopping these municipalities and saying, okay, well, we'll take your minimum 20 and we'll up it to 40. And I'm not saying that's going to happen en masse, but this is what they have the ability to do. What they don't have the ability to do is say, well, we don't want to do 20. We only want to do 10. They don't have the ability. The BC government, again, is taking away the zoning power from that. And again, when you go through this mass rezoning, specifically on the high density, you are saving developers a lot of time and money through the rezoning, because you don't have to go through that timely and expensive rezoning process, right? Like, time is money. If it takes an extra year or 2 or 2.5 years to rezone a property, in some cases longer, that's time and money. So again, I think part of that ultimately does get reflected back into your land costs. But at the end of the day, if you're near these sort of stations, you're going to get that land lift. It does provide a push on the lands. But again, because I think we've done this mass rezoning all at once, I think the land lift's going to be marginal, and we're still fighting economic gravity, which is mortgage rates at 6%. That does put pressure on land prices. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all shapes out. There's so many micro differences in each little market and how it could potentially impact land values and what will get densified. What I will say is this. I know people ask me this all the time. If you've got like an old apartment building, let's say it's a 4-story apartment building, and now you can go up to 12 stories, that's probably going to be one of the last things that really gets sort of rezoned or densified or gets bought out. Developers are going to go for the the easy pickings, right? The low hanging fruit, which is you take 4 single family houses, you package them up, and you build 20 stories. Very easy. The numbers will typically pencil in a lot of scenarios where these condo buyouts, these strata windups, those are really hard to do. They're time consuming, and there's still not a lot of lift there for these projects to actually work. So again, just because you got a low-rise building that's near a SkyTrain station, don't expect to get bought out anytime soon. But again, this is going to change the landscape. I would highly encourage you to go check out a Google map, go look at where the SkyTrain stations are, where the bus exchanges are, and where your proximity to your home is or where you want to live, because these communities are going to be changing over the coming 5, 10, and 20 years from now. So as always, hope that helps. It's some big changes. I think that BC is leading the charge on this. I wouldn't be surprised to see other provinces to start following suit. Again, love it or hate it, I think it does show some leadership to actually have the audacity to push these kind of policies through, which most politicians don't have because they're worried about getting reelected. So, as always, hope that helped. See you next week.